In the very first problem, when you divide by 3, when you divide something out, do you throw away that number?
No, you keep it on the outside.
You write on the outside. That needs to be in your final answer. So then you reduce. Plus 7, good. All right, now you're going to factor what's inside of the parentheses. Using the x method, what goes on the top of the x?
B.
B, which is? 22. And then in the bottom, A times C, which is?
21.
What are factors of 21 that add to 22?
1, 21.
All right, so when you go to rewrite your answer, you have 3 times x plus 1 times x plus 21. Is that my final answer?
No.
No. What do I need to do? Divide by 3. What's your question?
How'd you get 21?
You need factors of 21 that add up to 22. So the very first factor, very first factor of 21 is 1 and 21. So factors this that add up to this.
Oh.
And how is that not a final answer?
Because, listen, because x times x does not make 3x squared. No. Foiling is the opposite of factoring. We're trying to factor. If you foiled right now, you would not get what we originally factored. So we already did the slide, which was 3 times 7. But now we need to divide by the a term and bottoms up what doesn't go in. So divide each of these numbers by 3. 1 over 3, can it be reduced? No.
Put the 3 to the x.
Yep. So it bottoms up means it goes to the front of its own parentheses. And then 21 over 3, can that be reduced?
Yes.
Yes. To 7, yep. So, factoring and foiling are opposites of each other. If you were to foil all this back out, you would get the original problem of 9x squared plus 66x plus 21. We're not going to do that right now. Bless you. Because we don't have time.
Back out, right?
You don't have to. But if you want to check your answer, you can.
Yeah, but if you did, you don't do nothing with that 3 that's out there?
So if you were to foil what I have in green, you would get this step, 3x squared plus 22x plus 7. And then you would redistribute that 3, and you would get 9x squared plus 66. On the second, can you divide out a number?
No.
No. What goes on the top of the x then?
11.
11. And in the bottom?
10.
10. What are factors of 10 that add up to 11?
1 and 10.
So you're going to write x plus 1 times x plus 10. Again, factoring and foiling are opposites of each other. Your foil should help you get back to the original answer. But here, if you did x times x, that doesn't give you 2x squared. So you are going to have to divide in bottoms up. So you're going to divide by your a term. Divide by 2. And you're going to bottoms up what doesn't reduce. Does 1 over 2 reduce? No. So the 2 gets brought to the front of its own parentheses. And then 10 over 2, does that reduce?
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
It does.
to 5.
Will it be like a certain thing in the directions that let us know we need to do that?
It'll say factor. So we are going to talk about solving equations by factoring. On your quiz and your test, there's 2 parts, factoring and solving. So a lot of students, the only reason that they struggle at this quiz or test is because they don't read the directions. Then they don't give me the correct kind of answer. If you look at these 2, what's the difference in the directions?
Factor completely and solve each.
The very first word is different. Factor, solve. If you factor, your answer will end up looking like b plus 7, b plus 1. That's literally the answer to this problem over here. If you solve, your answer would end up being minus 7. So x equals 7, x equals 2. A problem or an answer that looks like this. In order to figure out which one, because they're similar steps, this says factor, so you need to leave it factored. This says solve. So just like any other equation you've ever seen that says solve, you should have x equals a number. Okay? So that's a difference. The directions are different. There's an equal sign in the second. In the first, there's no equal sign. You cannot just create an equal sign out of nowhere. Okay? And the third, your answer. I showed you what your answer should look like. The similarity, you're going to factor. Both of them, you're going to end up factoring. Okay? So make sure that you read the directions and know what kind of answer you're giving. We're going to talk about this property first. It is how we solve by factoring. I want you to write down. It's called the zero product property. Yes, these are your notes. Zero product property. If A and B are real numbers, and if A, B, when two letters are next to each other, what is happening?
They're multiplied.
They're being multiplied. So A times B equals 0, then A equals 0, or B equals 0. Here's why. 0 times anything is what? 0. So either in this little problem, if you have two things being multiplied, either the first is 0, so 0 times literally anything in the world. 0 times 1 billion. 0 times 7. So either A has to be equal 0 or B has to equal 0. And we're going to use this property. It may not make sense to you now, but it will in like 2 seconds. Let's do this example first. X parentheses X plus 7 equals 0.
I get it.
A lot of students would think to distribute back in. You do not want to do that. You want to get X's to look like X's. You do not want X squares. You want X to look like X's. So, in this would actually be the second to last step in a quadratic. I've already factored it for you. So what happens is, whenever you have anything in front of parentheses, what is happening? Addition, subtraction, multiplication. Multiplication. Whenever two things are being multiplied by each other, all right, you're going to take them and set them equal individually. Set them equal to 0. So X equals 0 is the first. And then you're going to do the same with the second. X plus 7 equals 0. So in the second little equation, how would I solve for X? Subtract 7. So X equals negative 7. Both of these are answers. I will say this. However many X's there are, or whatever the highest exponent is, that's how many answers you're going to have. If you were to distribute this back in, what's X times X? X squared. So the highest exponent would be 2, so you have 2 answers. So here is what your 2 answers mean and what the zero product property means. 0 is an answer. If you plugged in 0 for every X, it would look like this. You have 0, and then you have parentheses 0 plus 7. What's 0 plus 7? 7. What's 0 times 7? 0. So 0 equals 0. You could do the same thing with your other X. What is it, negative 7? You have negative 7. Then in the parentheses, you have negative 7 plus 7. What is negative 7 plus 7? 0. What is negative 7 times 0? 0. So the whole left side would be 0 equals 0. So that is the final step in solving a quadratic like this. We're going to do one more example. This is what the first 4 problems are in your homework. Super simple if you let it be simple. You have parentheses, x minus 10, end of parentheses, parentheses 3x minus 6 equals 0. I said if you let it be simple because I saw some kids trying to FOIL this. That makes it so much more complicated. Yeah, it did, because you're going to end up doing this again. So you want your answer to look like this. You're going to take your 2 factors. All right, you got x minus 10, you got 3x minus 6. Take them each and set them equal to 0. So x minus 10 equals 0.
Will we need those arrows that you're writing?
No, I'm just showing you where I'm putting them and where I'm getting them from. So the first answer is x equals 10. The second, you have 3x minus 6 equals 0. What is the first thing I need to do to solve for x? Add 6. Then you have 3x equals 6. What can I do next? Divide by 3. So x equals 2. You can always check by plugging them back in. If you plugged in 10, you'd have 10 minus 10, which is 0. 0 times anything, 0. If you plugged in 2 in the second parentheses, 3 times 2 is 6, minus 6 is 0. All right, and 0 times anything, still 0. So what's going to happen is there are technically 5 steps to solving a quadratic. The first one is to write it in standard form. So I want you to write down standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So these are actually the 4 examples we're going to solve all together. If you look at the first one, x squared minus 7x plus 20, is that in standard form?
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Because everything is on one side and 0 is on the other. You got a squared to the 1 and then a constant. So we're going to do all 4 of these on a separate screen. And then here are your 5 steps. First one, write it in standard form. You just wrote that ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0.
So it got to be in the order like that.
Yes, it has to. Because after that, you're going to factor. If it's not written in the correct order, then you're not going to get the x correct. So step 1, write in standard form. Step 2, factor completely. Third, set each factor equal to 0. We just practiced doing that on the last screen. You'll solve each little equation, and then you can always check. Here's our first example. 3x squared plus 4x equals 15.
What was the last one? Check solution.
Check your solution.
Check the solution.
So we have 3x squared plus 4x equals 15. The very first step was to write it in standard form. So in order to have it in standard form, we want ax squared plus bx plus c to equal 0. So we need everything on one side and 0 on the other. Here's what you also want. You see how you have 3x squared? Yes, no, maybe so.
Yeah.
You want it to stay positive. So you never want that to be negative. So what are we going to move to have everything on one side? 15. How do we move it? Subtract it. So the right becomes 0. And you'll have 3x squared plus 4x minus 15. All right, once you have it in standard form, what was the next step?
You have to factor it completely.
Factor it completely. What is my b term? 4. A times c goes in the bottom. 15 minutes plus 15 minutes plus 15 minutes is 45. So I do want to pause. Could I have divided out any number? No. They're not all even. They're not all divisible by 3, so I couldn't divide anything out. All right, so now I want factors of negative 45 that add to 4. Are my factors going to be the same sign or different? Different. And the bigger one will be positive because we want a positive outcome, positive 4. 2 doesn't go into 45. 3 goes in 15 times. 4 doesn't go in. 5 goes in 9 times. So it's going to be minus 5 and 9. So we're going to have x minus 5 times x plus 9 equals 0. So pause. That's what I was. If you left it like this, it's a factor completely. This is not factored completely. If you were to try to check it and FOIL it, you would get x times x, which is not 3x squared. So we have to divide and bottoms up. What number do we need to divide by? 3. Can 5 over 3 be reduced? No. So it bottoms up. 3x minus 5. Can 9 over 3 reduce? Yes. Once you have it factored completely, what do? Set them equal to 0. So we'll have 3x minus 5 equals 0. And we'll have x plus 3 equals 0. Yes, dear. I haven't. Nope. On 3x minus 5 equals 0, what do I need to do first to solve for x? Plus 5. So 3x equals 5. Then what do I need to do? Divide by 3. We're running out of room. So the first answer is x equals 5/3.
Oh, you can do that?
Yep.
Yeah, I was about to ask.
You can have fractions. Are fractions not numbers? Nah, they are. Alright, the second x plus 3 equals 0, subtract 3, and x equals a negative 3. Alright, so, on these problems, you can check them by plugging them back into the very original problem, meaning this blue, this bright blue up here. This is what I will also say if you're taking a PERT test. Please look up here, because some of you have not taken Algebra 2. Whether or not you're allowed to take, I don't know, but on the PERT test, it's multiple choice. So if you don't know how to do it, you can, and you have a problem that says x equals and x equals, you can plug them in to check. So what would happen is, if it says x equals 5/3, you can plug in 5/3 everywhere you see an x. I want you to do this in your calculator. So you would do 3 times 5/3 squared plus 4 times 5/3 equals 15. You should do that in your calculator. Go. If you do it correctly, you get 15 equals 15. So that means that answer is correct. You can also do it with negative 3. So instead of 5/3, you plug in negative 3 and negative 3.
Can you do this on all the questions?
Yep. You're saying this one does not work?
No, you don't have a calculator.
I know, you have to be able to multiply yourself.
I came out like negative 39.
You can't use the calculator on quite a bit of it. You can use it on random ones that I think you might need it on.
Yeah, it has like.
You're not allowed to bring a calculator. You're not even allowed to have your phone in the room.
She said it yesterday that way.
Hey,
It's
is
just
that
like a
serious?
little-
Okay, here's my next one. 4x squared minus 9 equals 0. Is there a b term?
No.
There's not. So what number represents nothing? 0. I had someone say 1, and that's not a thing. If I asked you how many Camaros you own, all of you would say none, which
One.
means a 0. That doesn't mean 1. It means none. All right, so I'm sure you do. All right, so what goes in the top of the x?
0.
0. What goes in the bottom of the x?
Negative 36.
Negative 36. So you need factors of negative 36 that add up to 0.
0 is negative 36.
No, 6 and negative.
0 times anything is 0.
Oh, snap.
6 and negative 6.
6 and negative 6.
This man is a
I'm just going to keep going.
You're a smart guy.
All right. Just going to keep moving. You're going to ignore it. We're going to keep moving. Okay. So if we did x times x, does that get 4x squared?
No.
No, it does not. So you still have to divide. Now here's where we pause. Does 4 go evenly into 6?
No.
No. But does it reduce? Yes. What does 6 over 4 reduce?
6 over 4 reduces to 3 over 2.
3 over 2. Alright, so you do the same exact thing. Since you can't reduce it anymore, we bottoms up. So we're going to have 2x minus 3. Bottoms up the second. We'll have 2x plus 3 equals 0. Once we have factored completely, what's the next step? Set them equal to 0. So 2x minus 3 equals 0. So what do we do to solve for x?
Plus 3.
Add 3. So 2x equals 3, and then we need to divide. So our first answer is x equals 3 over 2. Our second answer, we have 2x plus 3 instead. So first step, we're going to subtract 3. Then divide by 2. So x equals negative 3 over 2. There's actually a reason why. There's a name for a problem like this. I didn't say it because students try to memorize this and then they do it on all of the wrong things. Here's what I want to ask you. Is 4 a perfect square? Yes, it is. Is x squared a perfect square? Yes, because x times x is x squared. 4 is a perfect square because 2 times 2 is 4. Is 9 a perfect square? Yes, because 3 times 3 is 9. Are they being subtracted from each other? Yes, this is called the difference of squares. So if you ever see a problem like that, they'll normally look simple like this. X squared minus 16. You take the square root of the first. What's the square root of x squared? X. You write that in the front. What's the square root of 16? 4 and 4. And you're going to do plus and minus. Here's why. What are factors of 16 that add up to that 0? It'd be positive 4 and negative 4. You just did it and you didn't realize it. Here's what we factored it to. What's the square root of 4? 2. So we wrote 2 and 2. Bless you. So we wrote 2 and 2. What's the square root of x squared? X. We wrote x and x. What's the square root of 9? 3. So we had 3 and 3. And then they were different signs, a plus and a minus. Yep. All right. So I didn't teach you this so that you memorize it. I taught you it so that you could do it the X method way. You can sit in your seat. I'll bring you one. All right. We're going to do this problem next. This one's actually one of the simpler ones. X squared minus 7x plus 12. All right, so is it in standard form?
Yes.
Yes, everything's on one side, 0 is on the other. Is there anything we can divide out? No. So we're just left to factor. What goes to the top of the x? Negative 7, and the bottom? 12. So when I do this, are my factors going to be the same sign or different? Same. And they'll both be negative. So negative 1, negative 12, negative 2, negative 6, negative 3, negative 4. Those are all the factors. So our factors are x minus 3, x minus 4. So what is my a term here?
1.
It's 1. So do we need to divide? No, because if you divide anything by 1, nothing changes. All right, so we don't need to divide. We don't need a bottoms up. Once we have factored, what do we do with those factors? Set them equal to 0. So x will equal positive 3, and x equals 4. And again, you can check by plugging it back in. That was it. This was supposed to be the first example. That's why I went to my computer. I don't know how it got further down the list. We have one last problem. It looks harder than it is. All right, we do hard ones together so that when you go to do them by yourself, they're very simple. So you have minus 8x squared plus 4x plus 50 equals negative 34x. Yeah. This is supposed to be a minus. This one right here. It's not x in the answer. This is not an answer. This is not in standard form. Is it in standard form?
No.
No, it's not. So, there are two ways that you can do this. Personally, x squared always has to be positive, correct?
Yes.
I would move everything to the right side. I know that's a lot more work, but then we wouldn't have to divide out a negative. Everyone else in my earlier class moved this negative 34x to the other side, which is fine. We can do that. But just know it doesn't matter which one you move them to. You can only factor if x squared is positive, and you can only factor if you have equal on one side. All right, so how do I move that negative 34 onto the other side? add 34x. So, am I going to add 34x to 8x squared, to 4x, or to 50? To the 4x. So, we're going to have negative 8x squared plus 30x plus 50 equals 0.
That's how you would do it, or that's how everybody else?
That's how everyone else will do it. I would move it all the way over here. Either way, you're going to end up with the same answer. All right. Now we need to divide out that negative, but we don't have to just divide out a negative 1. Is there a number all three of them are divisible by?
Yes.
2. So not only negative 1, we're going to divide out negative 2. When you divide something out, where do you put it?
At the bottom.
On the outside. So we're going to have 4x squared
I thought you were talking about that.
minus 15x minus 25 equals 0. All right, so now when you go to factor, you're factoring what's inside of the parentheses. That negative 2 is outcasted. It's not, no, we're not dealing with it right now. What is the b term that goes in the top?
Negative 15.
Negative 15. And a times c goes in the bottom. So 4 times negative 25.
That's all.
Yeah, 100. Negative 100.
Did you say $1?
Yes, he did. That's okay. So whenever you see like 100, I always think of money. So think of 5s, 10s, and 20s. What combination of any of those add up to negative 15? 5 and 20. One of them needs to be negative.
Then
20 needs to be negative because we want a negative outcome. So we have negative 2 times x plus 5 times x minus 20 equals 0. We can't set these equal to 0 yet. Why not? Not the negative 2. X times x is not 4x squared.
oh, you got it bottoms up.
Yep, divide bottoms up. Divide by 4. I'm sorry if that's what you said. Why do they call it that?
Slide dividing bottoms up.
I don't know, maybe because it's kind of catchy. I don't know.
No, it's not.
It kind of is.
All right, well, then figure something out for yourself, Christian.
Okay.
So bring that 4. You're not even writing this down. You need to write it down. Stop whispering. Okay, you can try working ahead instead of just mindlessly writing down what I'm writing. Bring the 4 to the front of its own parentheses. So 4x plus 5. Does 20 over 4 reduce? To 5. After this, you take each of them and set them equal to 0. So listen. Negative 2 is technically a factor, but does negative 2 equal 0?
No.
Will negative 2 ever equal 0?
No.
So it's not a part of your answer. You don't circle it, you literally don't do anything with it.
So it's not factorable.
What? We just factored it, so it is factorable. It's just not a part of our answer. Alright, we're going to do 4x plus 5. I don't have room for it at the bottom of the screen, so I'm going to write it over here. 4x plus 5, we're going to set that equal to 0. I'm just writing it over here because I don't have the room. Alright, what would I do first to solve for x?
Subtract the 5.
Subtract 5. So 4x equals negative 5. Then what would I do?
Divide.
Divide by 4. So x equals negative 5 over 4. Alright, so I have done my 2 first factors. Negative 2 is not an answer. I did 4x plus 5 equals 0. Now I need to do x minus 5 equals 0. So on this one, what does x equal? 5. So here are my 2 answers.